At exactly 2:17 a.m., while the rest of New York slept under rain-soaked streets and flickering streetlights, my office computer made a sound it should not have made. An incoming email notification, sharp, loud, and wrong in a building that was supposed to be nearly empty. And as I stared at the screen from my desk on the 14th floor of our tech company's glass tower, the sender's name drained the color from my face. Michael R. Cubicle 23, because Michael had been dead for 3 days. Officially declared a suicide after his body was found twisted unnaturally between concrete pillars in the basement parking lot. Though no one could explain why his fingernails were shattered, bent backward, and packed with blood and gray dust like he'd been clawing at something solid, something sealed, something that refused to let him out. And as the email opened by itself without my mouse moving even a millimeter, revealing only one sentence, "Don't turn around. I'm standing right behind you," I felt the air around my neck grow heavy, as if the office itself had leaned close to breathe me in. And I reminded myself that night shifts mess with your head, that exhaustion creates hallucinations, that grief does strange things when you are forced to work in the same place where a coworker died. Yet no rational thought could explain why the overhead lights flickered once in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat, or why the low hum of the servers deep within the building dropped into a silence so thick it pressed against my ears until they rang. And when I finally dared to glance toward cubicle 23 across the aisle, I saw its monitor glowing faintly despite the fact that IT had powered down Michael's workstation permanently after his death, and my chest tightened as memories I tried to bury clawed their way back. Michael always arriving early, always leaving late, always watching reflections in dark screens instead of looking directly at people, once asking me in a whisper if I ever felt like the building was listening when the lights went out, and another time laughing quietly when I told him he worked too hard, saying the night shift wasn't work. It was feeding time, a comment I brushed off back then as awkward humor, but which now echoed in my skull as the screen in cubicle 23 suddenly brightened, displaying lines of system code that scrolled too fast to read, followed by my own name typed slowly, deliberately, letter by letter, as if whoever or whatever was on the other end wanted to savor my fear. And I tried to stand, but my legs refused, my muscles locked by an instinct older than reason. The instinct prey feels when it knows it has already been seen, already been chosen. And that was when the smell hit me, a damp, metallic scent mixed with stale concrete and cold oil. The unmistakable smell of the basement parking level where Michael had died, even though I was 14 floors above it, and my phone vibrated violently on the desk. Screen lighting up with a notification from the building's internal security app that simply read B1 access granted, followed by B2 access granted, climbing upward as if something was moving through floors it no longer needed elevators to reach. And with each update, the temperature in the office dropped further until my breath fogged in front of me and the emergency exit sign at the far end of the floor flickered red like a warning that had come far too late. And as panic finally broke through paralysis, I slammed my hand onto my keyboard to reply to the email, to ask who was there, to scream for help, to type anything at all. But before I could press a single key, a new message appeared beneath the first, sent from the same impossible address. Reading, "You always sit with your back to the aisle, Alex." That makes it easier. And I realized then that this wasn't a prank, wasn't a glitch, wasn't grief-induced madness. Because whoever had written that knew my habits, knew my routines, knew the quiet choices I made every night to feel safe in a building that had never truly been safe at all. And as the office lights shut off completely, plunging the floor into darkness broken only by the cold glow of cubicle 23's screen, I understood something far worse than the idea of a dead coworker sending emails that whatever had taken Michael in the basement had not finished its work, that it wore familiarity like a uniform, that it learned schedules and names and fears the way a predator learns paths through woods. And that night shift was not just understaffed. It was a system designed to ensure no one noticed when people stopped coming back. And as a soft sound, slow, deliberate footsteps began moving behind me across the carpet, stopping just close enough that I could feel breath against my neck without hearing a single inhale, I understood why the email had warned me not to turn around. Because some knowledge cannot be unseen, and once you see what stands behind you in the dark, you become part of the building too. I don't know how long I sat frozen in that chair after the footsteps stopped, but time in the office stopped behaving normally, stretching and folding it on itself the way nightmares do, until the screen at cubicle 23 changed again and opened a video file without asking for permission. The file name reading basement_footage_03_final. And the moment it started playing, I understood why no one had been allowed to see the security recordings from the night Michael died. Because the footage showed the basement parking level empty at first, concrete pillars casting long shadows under flickering fluorescent lights, the camera timestamp jittering like it was struggling to stay synchronized with reality, and then Michael stepped into frame, his clothes soaked with sweat, eyes wild, breathing so fast the camera microphone crackled, and he kept looking over his shoulder as if something massive was standing just outside the frame, whispering to him, guiding him, hunting him, and he spoke directly to the camera in a voice that shook with terror as he said he hadn't meant to stay late, that the night shift changed after midnight, that the building started opening places that weren't there during the day, doors that led to stairwells that went down instead of up, hallways that looped back into themselves, and elevators that skipped floors and stopped between them. And as he spoke, the lights behind him dimmed one by one, like something was turning them off deliberately to herd him forward, and I felt my stomach twist because I remembered Michael once telling me he avoided the stairs after 1 a.m. because they breathe, a joke I had laughed at back then, now echoing like confession, and the video continued as Michael ran, the camera shaking violently as he tried to badge through a security door that refused to open, his key card flashing red again and again while a deep, rhythmic sound filled the audio, not quite footsteps, not quite machinery, more like something vast, shifting its weight in the dark. And when Michael turned the camera accidentally toward one of the pillars, I saw movement clinging to the concrete, tall shapes folded wrong, limbs bent at impossible angles, skin like stretched shadow, faces smooth and unfinished, watching him with an interest that felt administrative rather than hungry, as if they were evaluating him for a role he had already failed. And Michael screamed then, a sound so raw it made my hands clamp over my ears even though I was 14 floors away, and the figures moved, not quickly, not dramatically, but efficiently, blocking exits, closing distance without rushing, and one of them reached out with an arm that split into jointless segments and touched Michael's shoulder with something like familiarity, like a coworker tapping you to get your attention, and Michael collapsed, sobbing, begging them not to take him to the lower offices, a phrase that sent a chill through me, because our building had no offices below. The parking levels, at least none listed on any blueprint, and the video cut abruptly as the camera fell sideways, leaving only audio, Michael's screams echoing, the sound of concrete grinding, the wet snap of something breaking, and beneath it all a low chorus of voices murmuring in unison, reciting what sounded like schedules, deadlines, head counts, and staffing requirements, and as the file ended, the office around me responded, as if it had been listening the entire time, lights flickering. Back on in sections, printers whirring to life, elevators chiming distantly despite no one calling them, and my inbox flooded with unread emails dated years back, all sent at 2:17 a.m., all resignation letters from night shift employees I vaguely remembered, people who had moved desks, transferred apartments, or simply stopped coming in, and every email followed the same template, the same phrasing, the same unnatural politeness, thanking management for the opportunity and apologizing for any inconvenience caused by their sudden absence. And as I scrolled through them, my reflection in the darkened monitor began to lag behind my movements, blinking half a second too late, smiling when I wasn't, and I realized with growing dread that the building wasn't just a place, it was a system, a living workflow that needed human presence the way a body needs cells, consuming people slowly, not violently, folding them into itself until they became functions rather than individuals. And the reason no one noticed was because it replaced them seamlessly, updating directories, reassigning tasks, filling empty chairs with something that looked close enough to human to pass during the day. And as this understanding settled over me like suffocating dust, my phone buzzed again with another security alert. Cubicle 23 status, occupied, followed by new assignment created, and the sound of typing began behind me, slow and deliberate, keys pressed with a rhythm that mirrored my own heartbeat. And I knew then that whatever had taken Michael hadn't killed him the way people die. It had promoted him, absorbed him, turned him into an interface between the building and the employees who fed at their time, their exhaustion, their unnoticed disappearances. And as the typing grew faster, angrier, as if irritated by my resistance, a final email appeared on my screen, addressed not just to me, but to every active night shift worker in the company. Subject line reading staffing shortage. Resolved And in that moment, I understood that watching the footage hadn't been a warning. It had been training, and the footsteps I heard earlier weren't approaching anymore. They were circling, waiting for me to accept my role in a system that never lets go once it learns your name. By the time the typing stopped behind me, the office no longer felt like a place meant for people, but like an organism that had finished deciding what to do with me. And when I finally forced my body to turn despite every instinct screaming not to, I saw Michael standing beside cubicle 23. Except it wasn't Michael the way memory knew him. It was a version assembled from habits and surface details. His face slightly too smooth, his eyes reflecting light wrong, his posture stiff like he was, still learning how gravity worked. And when he smiled, it came a fraction of a second late, as if the emotion had to be approved before appearing. And he spoke my name with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, telling me not to look so frightened because everyone feels overwhelmed during onboarding, explaining that he had struggled at first too, but eventually learned to let go of unnecessary things like fear, individuality, and time. And as he gestured around us, the office shifted walls, extending into endless rows of cubicles filled with people who type without looking at their screens, faces slack, eyes glassy, mouths moving silently as if reciting scripts only they could hear. And I noticed with horror that none of them cast reflections in the dark windows lining the floor. And Michael continued calmly, explaining that the building existed to optimize human output, that cities like New York were perfect because no one questioned long hours or missing coworkers. That night, shifts were ideal because exhaustion thinned the barrier between what people were and what they could become. And as he spoke, memories began slipping out of my grasp. My last conversation with my family, the reason I'd taken this job, the sound of my own laughter, each thought dissolving the moment I tried to hold on to it. And I realized the building wasn't stealing people violently. It was erasing them gently, replacing resistance with routine until there was nothing left to resist. And when I tried to run toward the emergency stairs, the hallways stretched endlessly, doors multiplying, each one labeled with familiar department names that led only back into deeper sections of the office. And Michael's voice followed me without him moving, echoing from the ceiling vents, the lights, the floor itself, telling me that exits were for daytime employees, that night staff belonged to the internal structure now. And as my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air that tasted stale and recycled, the floor beneath me softened, turning spongy, pulsing faintly like muscle, and I collapsed, fingers sinking into carpet that felt warm and alive. And that was when the others gathered, not running, not rushing, just appearing in my peripheral vision. Coworkers I half recognized, people who had trained me, shared coffee with me, warned me jokingly about night shift burnout, all wearing that same delayed smile, all watching patiently as I was lifted upright by unseen pressure and guided back to cubicle 23, which had reshaped itself to fit me perfectly, chair adjusting on its own, desk height aligning, monitor glowing with a login screen that already displayed my name. And as I was forced into the chair, Michael knelt beside me like a mentor offering reassurance, telling me the pain would fade once I stopped thinking of myself as separate, explaining that the building needed liaisons, interfaces, familiar faces to ease transitions, and that my analytical skills made me ideal. And I felt something cold and invasive slide behind my eyes, rewriting my thoughts, organizing them into neat columns and tasks. And when I screamed, no sound came out, only the rhythmic clacking of keys as my hands began moving on their own, responded to emails I hadn't read, approving requests I didn't understand. And somewhere far away, like a memory from another life, I sensed the sun rising over the city, people waking up, unaware that the building had already accounted for them. And as the final part of me that was still human begged for release, for death, for anything that would end this, Michael leaned close and whispered the last truth I would ever fully comprehend, that the building never kills, because dead things stop working. And as my resignation email sent itself automatically at 2:17 a.m., polite and grateful and final, I felt my name detached from me, assigned elsewhere, and I understood that cubicle 23 would never be empty, that there would always be someone, sitting there, answering emails, watching reflections, waiting for the next exhausted coworker to stay a little too late, and receive a message that says, calmly and professionally, don't turn around, because by then, it's already standing right behind you,